Iranian hostage crisis during his 4 years in office. The former president and first lady, though, may be best known for what they accomplished after their time in the White House. Jimmy Carter transforming the traditional role of ex-presidents by remaining a public figure and traveling the globe as a fierce defender of human rights through the establishment of the Carter Center. Like her husband, Mrs. Carter was devoted to public service. She was also a staunch mental health advocate and humanitarian. A lifetime together, they were partners in every sense of the word. ABC's David Muir looks back on Jimmy Carter's remarkable life.
He was the boy from Georgia, from the small town of Plains to the presidency.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
Growing up on a peanut farm in a home with no running water or electricity, he would forge his own path, an outsider determined to take on a corrupt Washington and to try to turn the page.
I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over.
His path to the presidency began in Plains, valedictorian of his high school, graduate of the Naval Academy, and after running the family business, he would turn to politics. In 1970, Carter was elected governor. But so unknown nationally, when he came onto the game show What's My Line, no one knew who he was.
Is this anything to do with the world of fashion?
No. 2 down, 8 to go, Donna.
Yet in 1976, there was a hunger in this country for his plain-spoken promise to be honest with the American people.
My name's Jimmy Carter. I'm from Georgia. Yes, I'm going to be the next president.
And this outsider would become the Democratic nominee.
As a candidate and as a president, I'll never tell a lie.
After Richard Nixon's scandals and Gerald Ford's controversial pardon, voters were drawn to this new face with a post-Watergate message. Carter's campaign fueled in part by rock and roll.
I want to introduce to you the great Allman Brothers.
He would later count Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson among his best friends. And it would all help launch a relative unknown to victory.
ABC now projects Carter is the winner with 272 electoral votes.
Wow, look at that.
He said he was surprised the first time he heard the words, President Carter.
It was kind of a shock to me, but I felt ready for it and prepared for it.
And determined to avoid formality, James Earl Carter Jr. would take the oath of office as Jimmy.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
the
office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
His wife Rosalind at his side. They married when he was 21, fresh from the Naval Academy. She was 18. And during his improbable journey, Carter's advisors would call Rosalind his secret weapon.
I look forward to consulting closely with him on a regular basis.
On Inauguration Day, he and the First Lady would leave the limo behind. They wanted to walk the parade.
And this is more like it was in the old days.
The time had come to sign the peace.
Human rights would drive his foreign policy. He helped forge an historic peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, which still stands today.
I'm so proud of both of you. God bless you.
Ahead of his time, he was the first president to warn of climate change, installing solar panels on the White House. But the setbacks at home, rising inflation, growing gas lines, would wear on the American people.
Good evening.
Issues he tried to address in what was later dubbed his malaise speech, though he never used that word.
It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will.
And Carter would soon face another crisis. After Iranian militants seized American hostages at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, the president seemed powerless.
The American hostages were blindfolded, handcuffed, and marched out on the U.S. Embassy's front steps by the revolutionary students.
My thoughts and my prayers for our hostages in Iran are as though they were my own sons and daughters.
An American rescue mission failed, and Carter would lose to Ronald Reagan.
The president, we hear, is preparing his own concession statement. What we may have at the end of all of this is the biggest landslide we've seen in years.
And after 444 days that gripped the country, the Iranians released the American hostages on the same day Jimmy Carter left the White House. ABC cameras were with him in those final hours when the release became reality.
Right on, man. That's great. That's great. I think that was the happiest day that I've ever had. Not in laying down the burdens of the presidency, which I did not want to do, but in just knowing that those hostages were free.
Carter was just 56 when he left the White House, unsure how he would define his future.
We didn't know what we were going to do the rest of our lives, and we decided to take on projects that no one else wanted to do.
But Carter would redefine the modern post-presidency. He worked with Habitat for Humanity. And through the Carter Center, he traveled the world with Rosalind to eradicate disease, monitor elections, and to promote human rights. All work that won the former president the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002.
We can choose to alleviate suffering. We can choose to work together for peace.
He would famously travel commercial,
I love you, Jimmy Carter.
shaking hands with passengers. But no matter how far he traveled, his home was always his farm in Tiny Plains, Georgia. In August of 2015, he revealed skin cancer, melanoma, had spread to his brain.
I've had a wonderful life. I've had thousands of friends, and I've had an exciting and adventurous and gratifying existence. But now I feel, that it's in the hands of God, whom I worship, and I'll be prepared for anything that comes.
But his faith and his strength would carry him through, and crowds would still line up at the tiny Baptist church in Plains, Georgia, for the former president, where he would return to teach Sunday school, just as he had for decades.
Let them know what Christ means to you.
Those lines a poignant tribute to a president who may be most admired for what he did after he left office.
It's been the best part of my life since I left the White House, but I really have been both gratified and honored and pleased. I'm excited to be the president of a great country.
The Carters had recently marked 77 years of marriage, and in recent days after the former president lost the former First Lady Rosalind Carter, he was determined at 99 and in hospice to be there to honor his wife. He went to the church in a new suit that had been made for him, wearing a blanket over his lap with the image of his late wife. The two of them were always a team, a shared purpose, a shared kiss. Jimmy Carter often said marrying Rosalind was the pinnacle of his life, more than any presidency.
Staying with me all this long has been the most wonderful thing in my life.
He's pretty wonderful in my life, too.
A remarkable life and legacy. Our thanks to David for that. The Carter Center announcing and confirming the death of the former president in a statement saying he died today at his home in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by his family. Of course, he is survived by his children, Jack, Chip, Jeff, and Amy. Their 11 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren. His son, Chip, saying in a statement, I want to read you this, quote, "My father was a hero, not only to me, but to everyone who believes in peace, human rights, and unselfish love," saying my brother, sister, and I shared him with the rest of the world through these common beliefs. The world is our family because of the way he brought people together, and we thank you for honoring his memory by continuing to live these shared beliefs. There will be many tributes in the coming days. They say public observances will be held in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., followed by a private internment in his beloved Plains, Georgia. I want to turn now to ABC's Steve Osunsami, who covered the Carters for years. Steve, you conducted what we believe is their last interview together last year.
Yes, I conducted their last interview together, and it was the former president's last interview ever. It was actually on their 75th anniversary. It was before their 75th anniversary, and one of the things about it that I'll say, having covered Jimmy Carter over the years, the many years that I've lived here, is that this was a truly honest man. This was an everyday man who found himself and led himself to exceptional circumstances, to the highest office in the land, who at the same time never forgot where he was from. I remember being on a plane. I was on a flight to New York, and I walked on the plane, and there was all of this Secret Service. And the reason why they were there is because former President Jimmy Carter was coming. And he did something then that I have pictures of and will share today as we continue to report this out and share on ABC News, of President Carter doing what he always did, which was he would walk the entire length of the plane and shake the hands of every single person seated. Whenever he flew, that's how he rolled. That's how he operated. He never wanted to make the inconvenience of him traveling go unrecognized by him and his staff. You know, this is obviously going to be a very sad day for the family. You know, I'm in touch with one family member who, of course, confirms that this happened today. There are different reportings about what time he died today. Mary, I'll also say, and I'm sort of stealing this from a friend who texted me just a few minutes ago about this, who said that, you know, it's fitting that he died on a Sunday. Former President Carter was, of course, a very religious man. He was a Sunday school teacher. And when he was teaching Sunday school at his church in Small Towns Plains, Georgia, the lines would wrap around the block. I think we're going to see some of that, even though it's a holiday weekend, here at the Carter Center, which is, you know, a place where he spent most of his time when he and his wife were in Atlanta. The Carter Center is asking people, instead of flowers, to donate to the Carter Center. And as many people know, that was his sort of life's mission on earth after the presidency, which was to improve the lives of his fellow man across the world. And he did it through encouraging free elections and even eradicating diseases. You know, there is, you're going to hear a lot of tributes about President Carter over the next few days. And one of the things that I think I would underline is that this is a man who is beloved by many people, but appreciated by an even larger group of people on both sides of the political spectrum because of what he did with his personal life, his post-presidency life. You know, this is a man who built houses for the poor. You know, who, I'll give you an example. I interviewed him once, I think this was around 2007 or 8. He had a book that he had published, and I was interviewing him for the book, and it was at the Carter Center. And I remember it was in the middle of summer, and I remember being downstairs, and it was hot. It was screaming hot. The thermostat was at 85, and I asked him to lower it, and they said no. Jimmy Carter, he won't let you lower the thermostat because he's got to save money. You know, the home that they lived in Plains is a small. My house is probably bigger than their house. He lived in a small home off this busy road, and in front of it is another home another facility they built for the Secret Service because of the cars the Secret Service has. And that home looks as big as the home that the Carters lived in. His grandson, who I talked with, told me, you know, that they, of course, will miss their grandfather, but they, you know, they have shared him with the world, and they will continue to share his memories with the world. Mary.
And Steve, thank you for sharing those personal memories with us. Our Steve Osinsami, who conducted his last interview. And Steve, you are so right that he will be remembered just as much for what he did in office as for what Carter did after he left the presidency. That no-frills, plain-spoken way of living that connected and resonated with so many. For more on that, now we turn to Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post correspondent and ABC News contributor Mary Jordan. And Mary, you covered the former president, of course, for decades. And most recently, you wrote a book about his relationship with President Biden. Tell us a little bit more about their unique friendship.
Yes, and we're all expecting that President Biden will give the eulogy when he has a state funeral. I live in Washington, D.C., really close to the National Cathedral, and for years they've been practicing for this funeral. No one really ever expected that he would live to 100 years old, especially because he had so many problems with his health. It was really considered a miracle when, he had metastasized melanoma. And, for many people who don't live through that, but Jimmy Carter somehow did. And I was down in Plains, and he was in his 90s. He was still swimming. He would go out. He liked to go shooting, and he liked to keep active. And as his son said to me this week, boy, his body was strong. It really, he didn't want to give up. He was a very religious man, as we all know, and he kept eating, and he felt like he had been given a gift of life, and he was going to live as long as he could.
And what a full life he certainly did live. And tell us, of course, a little bit more about his remarkable love story with Rosalind Carter. I think something that's an inspiration for so many, not just because of the family they built together and the work they did together, but the example they set for so many.
It was a joy to interview them together, as I did many times, and I was they were married 77 years, and they had a small 75th wedding anniversary party in the high school where they both attended in Plains, which is an out-of-the-way place. You fly to Atlanta, and then you have to drive 2.5 hours to a really small town of 700 people. And both of them met in this little town and attended this school. They knew each other almost from birth, as everyone in a small town did. And they were 7 decades in, so adorable. They would finish each other's sentences. He called her his partner in every way. When they were in the White House, it was actually quite a breakthrough at the time, because until then, the First Lady was really doing decorations, setting up parties, not doing policy, except Rosalind Carter did. She's credited with starting the first modern First Lady's office, and she brought mental health to the fore, which at that time people weren't talking about it. They were quite the dynamic duo, both with the work. They really felt like they were better together than apart, and so they were always together. And Rosalind told me, she said, well, I took up fishing because he liked to fish. So they worked together, they had hobbies together, they went birding together, and now they're going to be buried side by side. They were pointing out to me when I was in their house, right in front of their house, if you went to their front door, you look out on the property, and there's a gentle slope that leads to a pond. And she was recently buried there, and now he will be buried on that property right beside her.
Just a remarkable love story. I love seeing these photos of the two of them there together. And as you say, they will be together in death as they were in life. Mary Jordan, thank you so much. And the tributes are now coming in. We've just received a statement from the Clintons, from former President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, saying, Hillary and I mourn the passing of President Jimmy Carter and give thanks for his long, good life. Guided by his faith, President Carter lived to serve others until the very end. The Clintons noting he worked tirelessly for a better, fairer world. I want to bring in now our ABC's chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. And John, we've been talking so much about his life and his legacy and the work that the Carters did after the White House, but reflect a bit, if you will, about the work of his administration as well.
Well, Mary, Carter was a one-term president. It was a tough 4 years. It was a 4 years marked by the hostage crisis in Iran, inflation, stagflation at home, the 3 Mile Island nuclear meltdown. It was a tough period in America. It was a tough period for American foreign policy. He lost in a pretty big way to Ronald Reagan. Those 4 years, though, set the stage for what would happen over the next 4 decades. And it's really Carter's position as an ex-president that sets his place in history, in American history. I had a chance, when he was first diagnosed with the melanoma having spread to his brain, a very serious, dire diagnosis. It was almost 10 years ago. And I went down to the Carter Center in Georgia, where Jimmy Carter announced the news and actually held a press conference at the Carter Center. It was quite an experience as somebody who had been in the White House, interviewing, at press conferences like you have, in the briefing room, to be here with Jimmy Carter holding a press conference about this really awful, dire diagnosis. The expectation was that he would not live much longer. He was embarking on a highly experimental treatment, but he was there and he took many questions. I asked him to reflect on his career as a post-president, as somebody who had been president, all the work he had done since then, and to compare it to his time as president. And it was his answer, which I just recently re-listened to, was really interesting. He said that he found his experience after the presidency to be much more, these were his words, much more personally gratifying to me. And he said much more personally gratifying because as president, you serve at the time 250 million Americans, you deal with Congress, you deal with all that the presidency entails, but you have very little actual interaction with individual families and with the people you are serving. Whereas the work of the Carter Center, he personally had traveled to dozens of countries. The Carter Center did work in 80 different countries, some of the poorest, most remote villages in the world, providing basic health care. Of course, the homes he built helped build with Habitat for Humanity. And he said in that instance, in the work he has done as a post-president, as a humanitarian, he had actual personal interaction with the people whose lives his Carter Center was working to improve. And he found that much more personally gratifying. But he said that work was only made possible really to the extent that he was able to do it because he had been president of the United States. So, Mary, when you think about it, he served 4 years, single term. We've seen time and time again presidents leave the White House, go on to serve in corporate boards, give in some cases now, speeches that can pay $1 million for a single speech. Jimmy Carter didn't do any of that stuff. He went back to Plains, Georgia, went back to the place that he had helped build and had lived with Rosalind, and dedicated himself to this humanitarian work. But the fame and his experience as somebody who had been president of the United States enabled him to do far more than he ever could have dreamed doing as just Mr. Jimmy Carter. He was President Jimmy Carter.
John, you're so right. 4 years in office and yet a lifetime of a legacy built through connection and values and humanitarian work with not just Americans, but people all around the world. John Carl, our thanks to you as well. If you are just joining us, the tributes are pouring in now for former President Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States. He died today at 100 years old after having been in hospice care for the past year. There will be a special edition of 2020 tonight. Jimmy Carter, A Full Life, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. Tune in, of course, to ABC News Live. I'll be back with a full report on world news tonight. I'm Mary Bruce in New York. We leave you now with former President Jimmy Carter in his own words on a better America.
Wouldn't it be nice if the United States of America could be a superpower in maintaining peace and to be a champion of human rights? If we helped one person have a new friend, that's what I think would make America a better country.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
We now join our programming in progress.